program of economic development based on resource extraction. So this was the period where a massive program of economic development was started. Now, the third times which I talk about is Siberia's post-economic reform times, where Siberia as a region went through major upheavals. No more was it the USSR's centralized energy generation of USSR. This seems to be very, very important era. Post-Soviet policies have mainly targeted resource extraction and regional intensification, but resulting in lopsided progress and resource utilization. I could see some emotional moments yesterday in Professor Gallagher's presentation. Now, when I said about the scientific technological resources, so this is M.A. Ravrinthal, who established the city of Academia, which we saw. He felt that harsh climatic conditions are the primary cause of low population density, no doubt. Therefore, automation and the application of technology on the widest possible scale, that is more active participation by science in immense task of opening the Asian part of Soviet Union, represents the only means of exploiting the natural resources of the region. Now, this I visited and I have seen, and the universities and institutes of technology in Siberia have not simply acted as a place of concentration of qualified personnel, but as centers of collaboration for regional development. This is the only autonomous thing I feel that the region has. Siberia, the science complexes of Academy of Sciences of USSR, Academy of Medical Sciences of USSR, Lenin, all Union Academy of Agricultural Sciences, and reputed institutions in pure sciences, engineering, and technologies in organized in Siberia. This I want to promote. Like, really, I felt that when they have so much, and for any resource, for anything, but the thing which I feel is that there is no point and no use the knowledge which is kept in mind is not shared. Now, I felt that there are some bottlenecks or the roadblocks in Siberia's development. I think this diagram depicts that. Ironically, Siberia is a harsh land, yielding only reluctantly to exploitation. So some are facts, like we can't, but we have to further find out some things, or we have to talk on some issues which are. Now, in hospitable climate, now if we say this is the only factor, we can't do anything, I think California or the other, even the Antarctica, for example, we can take the examples of how they are thinking or how they have thought of even making those regions as a freezing zones, for example. Now, underdeveloped physical and social infrastructure. This is again, I feel that this area had been neglected as we also in the when we were talking of the eras of development. Then high river turnover and low capital efficiency because of these physical circumstances or the geographical or the harsh, we have this also. The labor shortage in Siberia, outflow of highly qualified personnel as conditions are too harsh, local economy friendly. Now, Russia has many energy problems. As many of our friends we have been discussing during these 2 days, individually or even in the papers, Russia has many energy problems. Now, if we take the supply side, we find Russia facing stiff competition from Europe. This is the current situation I'm talking about. Russia's ability to harness its energy resources remains far allied, especially in the eastern Siberia and far east oil fields. The Russian government has estimated it could earn more than $100 billion in profit. Their development, however, will require $55 billion of investment over the next 2 decades. Means the profit will be less. In the beginning, maybe, but later, especially in eastern Siberia and the offshore fields around Chhatrapati. So this talks of the high investments in the regions and maybe low profits in the beginning, but later we should be optimistic enough to, as we all talk of, that the minimum utilization, optimum utilization of the minimum resources. So here we have plenty of resources. What we talk about the minimum resources and optimum. So if we think that the resources are India and China keeping options open. So this is the demand side, which Russia or China we can keep in mind that how much market they can have. EU diversifying energy basket. So this is another factor which Russia should look at. After the Ukraine gas supply cut off, Russia is perceived as a weak supply. Means everybody wants to have this whole, and state-owned petrol giant Gazprom showing ambition worldwide buying state-owned companies around the world. So this sometimes creates suspicion to the other countries, and sometimes it is successful. Russia is prepared to sacrifice everything to become an energy superpower. So this is what Russia is also wanting in the present scenario. This is what was said by the presidential aide Vladislav Sukov's recent speech to United Russian activists. Now I talk about the strategy in Siberia, what I feel and what I think that it can compete and cooperate. So you should always have a competing spirit and also will to cooperate. I think that gives you the best solution and it brings you on the world map in a very, very forceful manner. Now this is the option which is for Russia or Siberia. Go east. The Far East is being exploited as energy complex. Asia is the focus. I think in all the seminars these days, this is, and it is very obvious that instead of Western side, it should come to it answers to some level or some percentage to the question raised by yesterday that we should, instead of going west, we should either come from north to south or we should travel to. I think this was by Professor Harish. Yeah. Now these are the projects which we all know. Sakhalin 1, where the major resource is the oil and gas, and the target countries taken is Japan, South Korea and China. And the key developers, these are the two, but there are others also, which is, some of them are mentioned in Professor Karina's paper. Now Sakhalin 2 is oil and gas, which again targets the countries Japan, South Korea at least, and China, sorry. And Sakhalin Energy Investment Company, majorly is Gazprom. Also include Shell, Mitsubishi and Mitsubishi, etc. Now the third thing, liquefied natural gas, which I think is going to come in the future. This is going to become very important. Japan, South Korea, China, US, and West Coast. And their companies are Royal Dutch Shell, Mitsubishi, and etc. Now there are Sakhalin 3 and Sakhalin 4 to 6. I think they have been protected. Professor Rene and Professor Karina's also talks of this Sakhalin 3, 4 to 6. But since they were proposed, they are still in operation. I have not included in my. Now China is a consumer, a world's second largest oil consumer after the United States. Its future energy systems will import an estimated 120 billion cubic meters of natural gas per year by 2020. A competitor in energy playground, Russian companies are also becoming increasingly active in Eastern Siberian oil and gas development projects directed at the Chinese market. Now, CNPC is also pursuing equity positions in Eastern Siberian fields. So, monopoly, these companies are thinking about either joining hands or remaining free. Now, let us come to India, which is the partner friend of Russia. India as an emerging partner. By 2020, according to the Observer Research Foundation, 45% of the growth in demand for oil is anticipated from India. Now, large potential demand for imported gas in India. India's presence in Russian Far East is now nearly a decade old, with ONGC potential engine plus Rosneft in Sakhalin. In 2006, the Russian Energy Ministry, officials said India can play a big role in jointly exploring vast possibilities in eastern Siberia and the coming years. So, India is its larger friend, long past history. Each one has spoken, many of them have spoken about India-Russia relationships, and now that was the strategy they felt, and this is some suggested strategy in Siberia, which I feel, which can be put as the developing alternatives for others. Now, Siberia has not only huge reserves of fossil fuels, but also enormous renewable energy resources and options to develop geothermal, wind, hydro, and biomass energy. This is what Professor Mitkas spoke about, all the kinds of energies, and he tried to show you through the maps that what are the potentials. In his paper, he gives the percentages and the other data also about the potential resources of all these, geothermal, wind, hydro, which are coming, like future. Siberia, which holds 6 out of 12, even the hydro map he had, where he showed, where we have plenty of hydro. Solar is, I feel, very less, or then wind also I feel, less of it for Russian use, or production I should say. Even what I feel is that because of the its physical presence in the world map, means it's mostly the temperate zone where the wind energy can be produced. Not, since it has not very long sea coast also, so wind energy and this thing, but hydro it has plenty. Adoption of technologies which rely on coal combined with technologies like carbon capture, carbon storage and zero emission technology would provide its citizens with environmentally acceptable energy. So I will talk about the coal, for example. We have to take definitely both the aspects, the social, ecological, economic, environmental. So all these factors one should never ignore while thinking of any kind of developments or extraction or exploitation. Siberia's resources are undoubtedly capable of providing obvious satiation to this energy hunger, given the untapped potential of extensive resources. Now, this is frightening or amazing, lowering or astounding. Siberia exists. People who know nothing about Siberia are ignorant of the planet's future. Now, to conclude, I will say 2 crucial points which seem to be fundamental agenda. One is sustainable development, and number 2 is a vision to develop the region beyond a mere advantage of Russia. Instead, there is only one overlapping idea of energy supremacy, which holds out the promise. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chief Engineer Shri Nagaich, who will give his presentation about the nuclear power, I believe, in India.
Yesterday, and I understand from our Honorable Mr. Balram Murthy that something has already been touched upon regarding the nuclear power yesterday in my absence. So I would just focus the current status of nuclear power in the country, the future prospects, and how nuclear is going to be, playing a key role in meeting the energy demand of the country. And the peak deficit is of the order of 14%, and 40% of the population in my country doesn't have access to the quality power. This is the kind of a state of affairs with per capita consumption of 700 kilowatt hour and total installed capacity of the order of 160 gigawatt, inclusive of 15 gigawatt of the captive power plant. This is the scenario as of now. And the resource utilization of all of you must be aware that the nuclear is contributing a very humble share of 2.7% currently, but likely to play a major role in the future. The renewables, the coal, essentially what I mean to say is it is the coal dominant thing which is being pursued in the country as well as world over. Nuclear is having a share of 15+%. That's it. Now what are the major concerns? I would just like to there are three concerns: meeting the demand, long-term energy security, environmental concern. All these three concerns are more or less the concerns of the entire world. It's not only the India or China or maybe Asian countries. Throughout the world, these are the major concerns. Maybe in some places meeting the demand may not be a very big concern, but then the environmental concern may be the biggest concern, right? So this is the kind of equation in respect of India. If you see the demand projections, you can see here by the year 2032, energy requirement would be 3,880 billion units. This is based on the 8% GDP growth, and as envisaged by the integrated energy policy. And the peak demand in terms of gigawatt would be 532, and the installed capacity to meet this demand 3,880 billion units or terawatt hours would be 778 gigawatt. These are very tall orders, and a study has been carried out by the Department of Atomic Energy. It says that by the year 2050, the demand in terms of installed capacity will go as high as 1,300 gigawatt in our country. So these are very tall orders, and all resources of energy need to be deployed. No single source would be able to meet the demand that we would see that in the coming slides. So right now the situation is, when we talk of the energy security, presently 30% of the energy is imported in the country. Mainly oil is imported, about 70%. By the year 2030, India's oil, gas, coal consumption is projected to grow manifold, and then need to reduce and deal with the risk. When we talk of the environmental concerns, power sector contributes about 40% of all the greenhouse gases emissions. Indian electricity generation predominantly about 80% fossil fuel based currently, and we will see in 2030, 2050 what would be the scenario. It would be essentially remaining same, but then the percentage share of the other resources would certainly increase. Every unit kilowatt hour generated releases about a kg of CO2. When we are talking in terms of the electricity produced by the fossil fuels, there is a need to decarbonize power sector because we have a responsibility. I think this is one forum we are talking about the societal values and the societal benefits. So I think it's very much pertinent that environmental concerns also must be understood and addressed. Now just to give you an idea, you see the up to the red bar, this is the direct emission by the coal-based power plant, and the white one, which is here, indicates the indirect life cycle, what we call it as. So you can see nuclear is here, is not visible even. Right? Nuclear doesn't release carbon dioxide, that is known to all of you, but even in the life cycle emissions, if you see, they are very, very low, insignificantly low. When I say lifetime emissions, that is right from mining up to the fabrication of the equipment, components, and deploying them, and then making use of the resources to produce the electricity. That's what lifetime, front end as well as back end, up to that. So this is one of the greatest advantages, and I think the world over this has been very well recognized, and that's the reason there is a nuclear renaissance that's going on. See, it's not the question of whether our country is going for nuclear and others are not going, or others are going, we are not going. It's a question of what is right. It's not that who is right. So now, why the world is offering us the reactors? Why did they shake hands? Is it that they want to trap us? Is it that they want to help us? Is it that they are scared? What is that? The reason is, one of the biggest reason, among the other reason is, that the economic growth which is registered in our country, India, as well as in China, is astonishingly very high. Last few years we have been registering of the order of 8 to 9%, and they would be the biggest consumer of the electricity. And therefore, if they not go for the alternative energy sources which are carbon free, they are going to burn coal and release lots of carbon dioxide. As I said, 1 kg of carbon dioxide is released by producing 1 unit of electricity, that is 1 kilowatt hour. Imagine when billions of units and trillions of units are being produced, trillions of tons of carbon dioxide would be released in the environment. In no time we will see that there is a carbonization of entire environment. And what are the penalties? In terms of economic penalty, another thing that we would see, there is a intergovernmental panel on climatic changes, and this has been picked up from that report. You can see the projected impacts of the climatic changes. When only 1 degree rise in temperature is there in the environment, you can see that the crops yield will be reduced, and as it progresses towards higher side. Right? Already in last 1 century we have registered a increase of almost roughly around 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius, and you can see that what kind of calamities, the kind of floods, the kind of devastation, natural devastation in form of either the tsunami or all those things are happening. So the report is very much elaborate. Only thing is to impress upon the point is that if we continue to grow in the coal technologies or such technologies which are carbonizing the sector, we may have to pay a penalty. We also have a responsibility to give back to the next generation in the best manner the environment, the resources, what we normally call it as a sustainable manner. Any advancement or the development which is to be taken over must be associated with a sustainable kind of approach. And if it is not sustainable, then we are going to pay a huge penalty. Now, what are the options? When we see the resource option, I will just talk of this depletion rate. This is in gigawatt years. That means if we produce 100, if the resource potential is 100 gigawatt year, that means if 1 year I can produce 100 gigawatt, or in 2 years I can produce 50 each, or in 10 years I can produce 10 gigawatt each. That's the kind of, you can understand. And on the y-axis here, you can see the different resources mentioned here. Now, what is most important is last year our country produced 704 billion units. That means 740 terawatt hours of electricity. Now, if the 700 billion units had to be produced only through a particular source, let's say if we are not deploying any other source, then what would be the depletion? How many years? You can see here, is very clearly visible here. I am not able to see this, but I can just tell you the years of depletion for the current reserves of uranium would only last for 4 years. The country which has uranium resources today, if I produce what I produced last time, only deploying the nuclear source, then the uranium will be exhausted in 4 years. This is the kind of situation, and the coal would deplete. I think it would be 21 years. Yes, I am not able to see this. Thank you. So now current rate, you can see here the fossil fuel will last long 130 years, the uranium will last long for 4 years, and the nuclear second stage in fast breeder reactor would continue for 211, and the third stage which we are talking would be more than 2000 years. If I produce the units which I produced last year, in 2052, the coal will last 11.5. Suppose we go to 2050, and the kind of requirement which has been projected, 1300 gigawatt, the coal would be only sufficient for 11 years. That means in 2060 or 61, coal will be exhausting in 10 years. So next generation would be suffering, and the development would not be sustainable. Now, what is possible scenario in 2031-32? Renewables will play a major role, as it has been discussed here. 14%, the coal will drop to 39%, and the hydro would continue to stand there, because the nameplate capacity for the hydro, as I understand, is 150 gigawatt, and of which the exploitable may be 90 gigawatt or so. So hydro will continue to be in the same range. Right now it is 24-25%, and it would be dropping by 3%. The nuclear would be 9%, and the natural gas would be 10%. This would be the possible scenario in 2031-32. It's not my view. Some studies have been carried out. Now, what is the compulsion of the government or the department, or what is the situation? Why did we go for the nuclear? A question is being asked. So I would just tell you, if we deploy all the resources, the red one is the hydroelectric source. Whatever the potential of hydroelectric has been assessed and reported so far in the integrated energy policy as well as by the other analysts. And the green one is the non-conventional. Put together all in 2050, there will be a deficit of 420 gigawatt. Now, in this case, we have considered nuclear to be having a domestic program. Only domestic program, there is no international cooperation with India. And 1.6 billion tons of the coal would be required to be imported. Last year we imported 31 billion tons of coal from outside. So coal import has already started, and it would amount to 1.6 billion tons. So this is the scenario, and the projected requirement line is here. You can see the deficit would be 412 gigawatt. Now, how to fill up this gap? So the strategy is that we deploy all the sources, as you can see all the here. You can see the red one, the green one, the blue one, the turquoise one, and the another one, purple one. All these are the different. This is domestic program of the nuclear. India has its domestic program, which is quite strong. The entire program, which is based on the 3 states that I would just touch upon, because that's very important for all of us to understand, is robust and on course, and is going very well. That's another reason people are shaking hands. Now, I was really little bit yesterday, while going through the proceedings, which were handed over to me by my friend Lakshmi. So yesterday night when I saw it, I found somewhere that people were telling that we are the people who are not very competent in the FBR technology. Now here I would just like to tell you, we are the only country who are competent to have the FBR technology, and it was stated in that paper that that's why India is not able to launch commercially the FBR program. I would like to clarify here that we have already launched a 500 megawatt PFBR, which will be operational in 2011, early 2011, and World is looking at us for the fast breeder technology. So now you can see here, when I deploy the domestic 3-stage program, that is first stage is already matured, commercially exploited, under operation, 45% realized. We can go for the 10,000 megawatt. The second stage launched commercially, and it has already been demonstrated for last 15 years, and many more second stage reactor will be there. Third is already developed on pilot scale basis, and it will be commercialized in the due course of time. When we deploy all these resources, I would reach here. And if I take LWR, the light water imported reactor of 1000 megawatt from Russia, US and other countries, that I would be just sharing with you. Then the plutonium which is available from those LWR of 40 gigawatt capacity, that means essentially 40 reactors of 1000 megawatt, or maybe 30 reactors of you can say little higher capacity of 1400 or 1600. Then I can very well place this there. That's where the entire gamut of the strategy is. So anyway, coal has to be imported. Now, if you see the equation between the coal, now when we talk of the long-term energy security, is the availability, accessibility and affordability. All 3 terms has to be seen. If I can produce and people are not there to use it because it's very expensive, then there is no use. It's as good as not available. If I produce something which is not accessible because of certain reasons, it's no use. If I have installed something, it is not available, as our Honorable Mr. Murthy was asking in the morning about the availability, it is as good as not available. So the thing is that when we talk of the long-term energy security, I would just like to make a mention here, for producing 1 billion unit of electricity, 1000 units, 10 to the power 6 units of kilowatt hour, we need only 2 bundles, which is coming to around 28 kgs of uranium, and against which 700 tons of coal is required. To give you just a flavor, if I want to install 10,000 coal based, the kind of coal requirement would be 3.5 million tons against the uranium requirement of 350 tons, which can be, transported in the trucks, lorries, right? And imagine 3.5 tons. How many trains will be required? 150 trains of having, standard number of bogies of 24. Now, is the country geared up? We don't have enough trains to transport our passengers, to transport, this is the kind of thing. And then if you want to store the fuel for 10 years, imagine that how much, 35 million tons of, for 10,000 megawatt if you are trying to store. The entire earth, the land area which is on the, available would be required if I have to go for such a tall order storage. So I can't store the energy, I can't buy it, and therefore there will be a heavy dependence, because anyway the coal import which has started will continue to be imported, and it will be going much and much higher from the other countries. So whether you import uranium or whether you import coal, it is same, one and the same thing. If you are not assured of fuel, either coal or uranium, then you will not have power. If you are assured, then in both the cases you are assured. That's what the entire thing is. Now only thing is why we are going for nuclear. One is, I explained you the environmental concern. Second thing is nuclear is quite economic. That you would be seeing. I will be giving you the actual figures, and Mr. Jairam, who is CERC, one of the chiefs, who would be endorsing that these are our tariffs. Right? I am just going to tell you how economic the nuclear is. So coming back to the 3 stages.